So, Ollie, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you coming on. I watched your video recently, how Britain is contagiously miserable, and it really struck a chord with me. It really resonated with me, and I think it resonated with a lot of people. I think last time I saw the video, you're on over a quarter of a million views, I think. I encourage any of my viewers, if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening on Spotify, Apple, I'll put the details down below. I'll put a link down below. Check out Ollie's video. It's a strange thing because we've kind of had this in our culture in Britain, that we kind of joke about how the fact that when we meet someone for the first time, we always moan about the weather, and it's just a big joke. But in your video, Ollie, you kind of take it a bit further, where you almost sort of say that it's ingrained in our culture, and it's almost maybe responsible for some of the reasons and some of the downfalls of Britain right now. I'd love you to speak a bit more on that and just explain what it how this suddenly came to you, because I hadn't really thought about it so much before, but that's why your video is really
Yeah.
interesting to me.
Yeah, sure. So it's come to me over time rather than it being something that's sudden. And to give a little bit of context, actually, this isn't the first time that I've gone viral on social media by bashing the UK. It's actually probably the fifth or sixth. It's how I first grew my channel on TikTok last year, and it's how I've grown on Instagram and YouTube. So interestingly, it seems to be a very effective marketing strategy in the UK to bash the UK at the moment. I've noticed it with plenty of other creators as well. So it's clearly something that is resonating with people, because the reason that people are engaging with it is because they either relate to it or they start arguing. And this is a big reason. Like, if you look in the comment sections of these videos, which I don't do, but I know exactly what's going on, it's people fighting politically in there. But that's just to set a little bit of the background on what's happened there with this. So the reason that I formed this opinion, I would say, is pretty much from me living in the UK and then living in 4 or 5 other countries around the world, including Australia, which, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty much a clone of Britain, given the history. Culturally, it is very much a replica of Britain, but they're not miserable like the Brits are. And then living in other places that are completely different culturally, and just seeing the different outlook on life. Britain is, as I say in the video, contagiously pessimistic and negative. It is just very deeply ingrained in the normal interactions we have and the way that we see things. And I think that the primary example of that, as you've just mentioned there, is the sort of the complaining element of things. British people bond over complaining, and that phrase is actually something that an Aussie pointed out to me once, saying that he found it fascinating. So I've never seen a nation that immediately they'll meet each other and they'll complain about something, and that's how they form their connection. Like, it's kind of funny in a way, but also it's not great, because if you think about it, you're bonding over negative emotion, and if you're experiencing negative emotion persistently, you are going to feel shit. You're not going to have a good headspace, and that, on both the individual and collective level, is not good for the mental well-being of people. And I think over a series of time, over the years, and understanding my own country and our culture and living in other places, and generally just being curious by people and culture, it really became quite clear to me that Britain is a very miserable place, even without what's going on at the moment politically and economically. Culturally, there is a deeply ingrained pessimism and apathy and other things that we can get onto. Does that make sense, what I've said there, as a sort of
Well,
general summary?
yeah, it's interesting that the fact that you started that by saying that when your videos have gone viral, and I've experienced semi-viral videos on the same thing of moaning about the country, you're almost explaining what you're talking about there by the fact that we have this sense of just wallowing in our own self-pity, that we enjoy other people talking about how miserable this country is, and it's really sad. But interesting how it's really ingrained. You know, it's always been a joke. British people always know this. You just said that whenever we meet people for the first time, we always moan, and we've always known this, and we always laugh about it. But it does go further. It does go further, and it does, I think, which you highlighted in your video, result in some of the problems that we have with just endlessly voting in governments that don't help us out.
Yeah.
It just goes on forever. I'm interested in why do you think we have this? I mean, I've heard, there's certain theories that I've heard from people on this. You know, the fact that Britain has never been humbled on the world stage. You know, you think of the continent where during the war, the occupation, we've never really had to fight for anything in this country. We've never had a French Revolution or the Russian Revolution or anything like that. And our motto has always been keep calm and carry on. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
just see it out, and you know things will be okay. But I'm interested in your opinion on where you think this culture of just pessimism and moaning actually comes from.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. There are various avenues. You know, like one that comes up a lot of the time is weather. But you know, in that video, I spoke about my experiences of being in the Netherlands, where it rains more than Britain, but the Dutch aren't miserable and complaining all the time.
Mm,
It's the same with Belgium. And even again, like Melbourne in Australia has a temperate climate that isn't too dissimilar to Britain. Granted, it's a bit more all over the place, but it's still cold, wet, and grey for a good chunk of time there. But Melburnians aren't miserable like Brits. So I think weather definitely contributes to it. I really think it is a big part of it. The sort of persistent, lingering grey that we have, rather than say if you go into Scandinavia where it's colder in the winter, but at least they'll have clear skies. Whereas here it's like this meh. And I genuinely think for a lot of people that really rubs off. And I will vouch for that personally for myself. I was born in the wrong country. This is why I live in Southeast Asia now and I follow the sun. I love the sun. British weather really doesn't make me feel good being here. But as I've said, I don't think that is the primary reason. I think it is something to do more with the culture. And my current suspicion, and I could be wrong, but my current leaning is thinking that it is probably linked to our social class system, which is very deeply ingrained. And I do wonder if this kind of keep calm, carry on, tolerate things is a method of social control that has been deeply ingrained through our class system over the past millennia. Because, you know, fundamentally, if that is the case, it's going to stop people from protesting and rebelling and demanding better. And to give you an interesting example of this, one of the things that inspired my video was I was chatting to a German who moved here in the 90s. And I basically said to him, why the fuck did you move to Britain? And his answer was that, well, in Britain, business incentives were really good in the 90s. But one thing that I picked up on in my time of being here is that British people tolerate far too much. The shit that they get from their government, the way that they are mistreated, it's just ridiculous that they don't do anything about it. And again, I wonder if that is linked to mechanisms of social control within the class system, both top down and both within the social classes. Because I don't think it's just a case of like upper class or middle class pushing down working class. I would say that the working class actually self-regulate themselves as much as they get pushed down, and the same with the middle classes. Do you know what I mean here, or do you need me to
yeah,
expand on?
I completely agree. It's really interesting, and you brought up some interesting points in your other video about the class system in this country. The most interesting, I think, is this strange idolization that the working class have for the upper class, but then the pure hatred for the middle class.
Yeah,
It's completely wrong. You know, the ones that are causing misery on the working class, the ones that earn all the wealth, and let's be honest, one of the biggest problems in this country is just wealth inequality, and the working classes have this inbuilt just desire for the upper classes, which is why we vote in people like Boris Johnson and idolise people
Yeah.
like Jacob Rees-Mogg, and why most of our politicians are from Eton and private school. But there seems to be this incredible, I don't know where it started, where it come from, but we have this perfect storm in this country where the middle class and the working class are battling against each other and not battling up where they should be. And
Yeah.
there's this strange battle between, I mean, it's it's more than just a political divide, but I think a lot of that is coming now. I think that a lot of this has been exported from America as well, where the middle class and the working class are just fighting against each other through cultural reasons. But it's a very good point about the class system, and maybe you said that we've had this history of the, I guess, the royal family and everything like that, whereas countries like France have had that revolution where you said that businessmen like to come to England because we seem to tolerate a lot more, and maybe we've just got this epic history of just constantly tolerating what the royals and the upper class are giving to us. And like I say, we've never had that revolution like they've had in France, where we've never had that kickback where we're like, no, we've had enough.
We did though in the English Civil War, but then we restored the monarchy
Mm,
after I think about 15 years, and even then when Charles the first was executed, there was, from what I understand, from what I studied of it, there was a real bizarre response to it, where both parliamentarians, the anti royalists and royalists, were shocked at what had happened, and it almost seemed like there was a guilt and regret of it happening. Now, granted, we did replace the monarchy with another dictator in the form of Oliver Cromwell, but we did have our revolution, and even then the country was very split between who supported the royals and who didn't, and the social class system was kind of different then because we weren't capitalist, but you still had peasants supporting the royals at that point. You had peasants who didn't support the royals and were on the parliamentarian side, and a lot of it was religious division as well. But yeah, we haven't been like France, where they really rebelled
mm,
against it and said no, this is where we're drawing the line. And I mean, if you also look at the origins of the social class system going back, a lot of people would say it originates with the Normans and the feudal system, and a lot of upper classes can actually trace their lineage to the fucking Normans still today. And this is also a theory. I kind of wonder if that's where the anti-French sentiment in Britain sometimes comes from, because of the upper classes not wanting to be associated with the Norman French.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, you look at the origins there, and then also again think about the time around the English Civil War. One of the biggest problems that was in society at that point that people were battling against was the shift away from the idea that the monarchy was God given. Charles I believed in the divine rule of kings, so he wholeheartedly believed that he was a servant of God and had been put in place as the King of Britain to rule by God. And people were starting to question that at this point, as the emergence of Protestantism came up, and there was the battle between Catholicism and Protestantism. So if we look at this sort of the way that societies evolve over time, you think about it, there was a point where everyone in this country believed that the royal family were a human embodiment of God, right?
Mm,
So you think about the impact that's going to have, and it fizzled out over time, but there was still this idea that these elites deserve to be in power. And you see this now today with Britain. What is our national anthem? God save the monarchy,
yeah.
right? Like, and if you look at the extended verses as well of that national anthem, where it refers to, I believe it refers to colonialism and battle and stuff like that, and you think about it, who was doing the fucking battling this whole time? The plebs,
Mm,
right? Like, but and they're the ones simultaneously singing God Save the King" patriotically and worshipping the monarchy. Like, it is a bizarre, bizarre system, as you say here. And then, yeah, equally, you then have that infighting. Is that a distraction? Is it so that you create division amongst people, whether it's immigrants, whether it's middle and working class, so that you keep distracted from those who actually have the power or influence? It's a theory. I'm not saying it's true, but again, I appreciate that I've gone on a bit of a tangent here with a range of different
No,
things.
no,
But
I completely agree. You make some fantastic points, and it's so true. We just can't shed this just desire for the upper classes that they need to be in control, they need to rule. It's so ingrained in British society, and it's even, when we have choices of change put in front of us. I think, like I said, I don't want to get too political on this conversation. It's not about that. It's about British culture. But over the last 40 years, we've more or less had the same sort of choice, starting with Margaret Thatcher and then Tony Blair. It's like, okay, it's slightly different, but pretty more or less the same. And when we actually do get a choice of something drastically radical, like I say, it doesn't matter where your political allegiance lies, but we've had the choice of a change over the last 10 years, whether it be Nigel Farage or whether it be Jeremy Corbyn, these sort of drastic changes. But
yeah,
we almost in Britain feel like, no, I'm quite happy. I know things are shit, but I'm more happy in my swallow, and I'm more happy with these guys in control. It's just, it's such a strange thing. It really is.
it's that acceptance of those people being in control, but then also not being content with your life, and then channeling your anger and um, disenfranchisement at other things, whether that be the European Union, whether it be migration, whether it be each other. Like, and this is part of it. People that they are tolerating things, but British people aren't happy, are they? We were voted the second most miserable country in
Mm,
the world after who? Fucking Uzbekistan, a former Soviet Central Asian country, right?
mm,
Like, there's no disrespect to Uzbekistan, but if you look at the history of that country, recent history, and the level of development and the prospect there and whatever, and compare it with somewhere like Britain, right, which is in the top 6 most powerful economies in the world, is a first world nation. It speaks a lot of volumes about the culture here, right? It's not
yeah.
it's not good at all. Like, the people are pissed off here, but it always just seems like nothing is really done about it, and that frustration is channeled through the I don't want to say the wrong avenues, because I don't want to downplay people's concerns about
Yeah.
immigration or community problems. I think it's very important that people are listened to with these things, but it's very clear that there are bigger problems as far as I see it. There are bigger issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah, but I mean, people just looking constantly for someone to blame. But
Yeah,
we I can't get over this fact that there is in our culture an enjoyment in moaning about these things. We said about our channels and our videos that do well are the ones that are moaning, and when my job, I run a small second-hand furniture business, and I do sort of 5-6 deliveries a day, and I meet people for these short amount of 5-minute sections. And I
yeah.
live in Brighton. It's quite multicultural, and I visit different people from different backgrounds, and it's always a nice chat. But whenever I deliver someone who's British, I'd say 9 times out of 10, that 5-minute conversation will descend into moaning about something. Oh, I couldn't park round the corner. Oh, it's the bloody council. They're not doing this, and it's like a 5-minute moan. And this thing in Britain where if you get bad service, how many people want absolutely gagging to tell you about that call centre that they rung up when they got put on hold for half an hour and they couldn't get through? And there's an
Somebody
enjoyment.
yesterday.
There's an enjoyment out of misery. And it is ingrained. And something else interesting that you said in your video, which I completely agree with as well, is the things that you're proud of this country: music, culture, comedy, art. And ironically, I think the reason that a lot of that is so good is because good music, good art comes from misery. comes from
Yeah,
pain and suffering. You
sure.
think of Amy Winehouse, comedy.
Yeah.
What comedy's good where the guy gets the job and gets the girl? That's not funny. It's funny when the guy gets the job and the girl and then loses it and falls flat on his ass. And this is why I think we seem to be so good in this country at comedy
I mean,
and
look at
music.
look at Scotland. They produce some of the best comedians, and the Scottish have
Yeah,
it really rough. Like,
yeah, yeah,
think, think about, but I'd agree with you. Yeah, from that brashness, and again, you can see it with literature and poetry as well. Russia has produced some real great thinkers, particularly on the sort of darker side of philosophy. People like Dostoevsky, and you can see again a lot of that was inspired by the roughness of it. And again, on like a micro level today, if you look at the street music that's come out of London, like the growth of drill as a genre, like again, it comes from poverty and suffering. A
yeah.
lot of it, like it does seem to inspire people. But yeah, to move away from it being more cultural and looking at it on more of an individual level as well, complaining itself is I think something that is a product of ego, and it allows us to regain a feeling of control and comfort, because there's more discomfort in letting go of your complaints, or actually striving to do something about the pain that you're experiencing. And I think it's really important on an individual level for personal growth to develop mindful practices where you start recognizing your thought processes, particularly around complaining. Because when you do verbalize complaint all the time, like you are putting that out there, and you are reinforcing these thought patterns and neuro pathways that themselves don't make you feel good. But that is something that needs to come from a level of education around your thinking. And again, this is where I think the East, as we spoke about just before this pod, if you look at some of the philosophies like Taoism and Buddhism, where they teach you more about understanding your thought processes, I think actually a lot of British people would probably benefit from that if they're able to recognize, yeah, I'm complaining all the time and it's making me feel like shit. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. So I've often said not only the moaning that we get in public, but also the amount of people that spend a lot of their time just arguing about politics online all day, and that's got to have an impact on the mind if you're constantly, if the majority of your interactions every single day are negative. That's gonna have an effect on your mindset and your outlook.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
what I want to talk, it's a hard one. It's a hard question, but I'm on a search on this podcast really to try and find how we can improve this country and go forward. And
Yeah.
I want to know. I mean, how do we actually get away from this mindset? Do you have any hope for this country going forward? I guess that would be my question to you. Sorry, there's a lot to
uh,
unwrap with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's I have my ambition naturally in my own personality type, and maybe it's a reflection of naivety as a 26-year-old. The pragmatic part of me says, to fundamentally shift culture and a collective consciousness and collective mindset takes a hell of a lot of time
Mm,
and a lot of means of influencing people. But it it can change. Yeah, it's definitely possible. Whether I think it will, I'm not so sure. I mean, I think at the moment it's particularly pressing just because of the impact that the economy is having on people. And naturally, when an economy isn't performing well, people then turn to the politics as a means of finding explanation and a way of channeling their frustration or wanting change. But then there's this realization in Britain that actually you have no fucking power, despite us being a democracy, and that our politicians are self-serving wankers who don't do anything to change the country. So it's like we're stuck at the
mm,
moment with that. So I guess what, in terms of looking at the solution, it would be, do we radically reform politics? How would we How would we do that? You'd have to look at things like the news as well. This is another thing that I think I mentioned in the video. The BBC is fucking miserable, right? The 10 o'clock news. Oh my god! Like when I got back a month ago, my mate put it on, and this was after me being out of the country for 9 months, and just immediately I was sitting there like, why are you watching this just before you go to sleep? It's just like story after story of shit, bad news, right?
Mm.
So and it's not just the British media that is negative, right? We all know that media around the world is negative, but even when you contrast it to places like America, like Fox, they they're being critical, but it doesn't have this kind of pessimistic feel to it in the same way that like the B does, or Channel 4, or ITV. I don't know what it is. There's something very British about it, but yeah, that's one thing. I think the influence of the media. Economically, I think things need to improve. People need to get paid better. They need more time, I would say, as well. I personally think that the 9-5 model is outdated and ridiculous. We don't need it. I would also say that actually people should pay less tax, particularly the average person. I think we have a very unfair taxation system that actually disincentivizes and penalizes people aspiring to make themselves better off and do better, while simultaneously rewarding the hereditary elites for money they've held on to. So I
Yeah.
think if we address that, if we address some of the inequality, that could possibly help. The weather, well, let's just push global warming further, and then hopefully we'll have some good summers consistently. Like
So
aside from
some interesting points though. I interest in the fact of the working hours. I think that might actually be something that is forced upon us anyway, when the involvement of AI in the workplace. I mean, in 10 years time, I think it is near enough a matter of fact that probably about 50% of working jobs will be gone anyway. So I think we'll have to move to a model of shorter working hours for more pay, whether there's some sort of
yeah,
universal basic income or something.
yeah,
There
yeah,
has to be something. So at least that is something maybe to look to in the future. But I mean, you're right. We just need to improve our lives. Something that's the only way that the culture is going to change, is just by improving our lives. And if we have less more time for friends and family and to do things and being able to do things and be out, you say about the economy. I mean, just going out and having a pint now just costs a fortune in this country. It's just
that's
something.
it.
It's so,
If you think about it, like the life of the average British person, what do they do? Like you're in this system here where you have to work, right? Because if you don't, like for the average person, this is if you don't, you're then going to go on universal credit, which is fucking awful. So you have to work. There's a limited variety of the work options here. Most of it is centered on London. We have really bad wage stagnation, lack of and a lack of productivity because people are unhappy in it. Then you're overtaxed, and your cost of living is just completely disproportionate. Again, especially in London, where most of the work is. So it really is a bit of a shitty existence. Like what are most people doing? That they are very much stuck in this rat race lifestyle. And then I guess the normal cope that people would have had for it would have been to go and drink, and that is obviously still a big part of British culture. But even now, as you say, like think about the cost of pints going up, like and the decline of the pub in Britain.
mm,
And this is another thing that I forgot to mention that I think is really important actually in Britain is community, man. Like like I said, I'm 26, so I don't know what Britain was like, but I've spoken to plenty of people who were alive pre Thatcher, and they say Britain used to have a lot more of a community. Right. There are some people that will blame it on immigration. There are others that will say it's neoliberalism, but it is something that I've heard repeatedly from older people that Britain actually used to have more of a community. And an interesting contrast that I heard of this was some one of my best mates, his parents, right? They're working class from Rochdale, and he lives in Australia now. And they went out to visit him, and they said Australia is pretty much culturally like what Britain was before Thatcher. There is still a bit
mm.
more of that community there, and supporting one another. And I really think that's important because we have a highly individualized culture, and I appreciate the importance of respecting like individual thought and freedom, but you know, we are a pack animal. At the end of the day, we do need communities and ways to support each other. And at the moment, it just feels like, one, in Britain there's eradication of that community, and then two, it's even worse the other way. It's that everyone is fighting each other. So it leads to this mixing pot of unhappiness, and that is not going to create a positive society, a healthy society. There's going to be a whole range of problems that come from that, whether it be that crime, whether it be health conditions, mentally, physically. It's all in all just a real shit sack. But
Yeah,
to leave
it's
the question is, you know, what do you do about it? Because it is complicated. There's a lot of different things that you need to address here.
it's interesting at that point of community, because I think most Brits will tell you that, yeah, we've lost a sense of community in this country, but it's really hard to pinpoint what actually is responsible for that. It's a strange one, but yeah, when you go to other countries in the world, it's it's there. You see it in, and you know, this is why the argument for immigration falls flat for me, because most of my neighbours, I've got Polish neighbours this side, Ukrainians on the other side, they have that. Weekends, their friends come over, they socialise, they have that sense of community. And like I say, it's really hard to pinpoint why we lost that, but we've definitely have lost that. And also in the workplace as well, you mentioned, you know, we used to have a big sense of community in the workplace. You think of your average building site, bricklayers or stuff, the camaraderie that we used to have, that seems to have gone now. When you speak to people about their biggest grievances in their job, it's always workplace politics, it's backstabbing, it's you know, people trying to fight each other to get the promotion. And even in the workplace now, we seem to be up against each other and fighting each other. And it's just strange. It's because I really cannot pinpoint where that went and why that went. I don't know. You know, a lot of people will blame Thatcherism for individualism and stuff like that, but I think it's way more than that. I don't know where it's gone, but other countries seem to have it. And I guess that's where I want to steer the conversation a little bit, Ollie, actually, because you have lived and worked in a lot of different countries. I've been lucky to visit a lot of countries, but visiting, going on holiday is very different. Another thing that's interesting about Brits is I see this in a lot of reels on Instagram and stuff, that people live for their holiday. It's like the only time that they're truly happy is when they get the hell out of this country. And I know there's a lot of rose tinted glasses with going on holiday. It's not like living somewhere, but when you do see how other people live, it's such an eye opener. And sometimes I think that's lost with Brits. I don't want to tell people how to have their holiday or where to go, but you know, the majority of Brits, if they do go abroad, they'll go to Benidorm and they'll go and have their English breakfast and they'll go to the Red Lion. Look, I ain't here to tell you how to have your holiday if you've been working hard all year and that's what you want. But you know, you don't see how a lot of Brits don't see how other people live. And I think that is one of the biggest eye openers, and maybe one of the ways that we can actually solve the problems in this country. If more people went abroad and actually see, you know what, this isn't what life has to be like. We can run this country in other ways. I mean, I recently, last week, I got back from Poland. I went to Krakow for a weekend, and that was a massive eye opener for me, especially as the Poles descended on this country in the early 2000s to better their lives. And now I go over to Poland and, you know, granted, I visited one city, Krakow, I didn't experience the whole country. But that city is incredible. It's clean, it's safe, it's just, everyone seems positive and happy. And it was such a juxtaposition, because, you know, I had this image, you know, Poles descending over here in the early 2000s to try and better their life. And I'm thinking, what are they doing over here? Their country's amazing. You know what I mean? I did ramble on a bit, but yeah, my main point to you is do more Brits need to experience going abroad, and do they need to live and work? Because that's something I've never done, and I'd like to experience that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, as well, to address the point that you said there, like Poland is on an upward trajectory now, and the Poles are moving back to Poland
Mm,
en masse because their economy is due to grow massively. They're developing loads, their wages are going up, and they have more community there. So it does make sense. And another thing as well is, the Poles are often seen by the Brits as like second class citizens in this country, despite the fact that like Poland contributed so much to Britain, whether that was in
mm,
the Second World War and what they've done over the last 20 years. So like, yeah, I don't blame them for going back there. But then in terms of the point about do British people need to go abroad and live abroad, yeah, absolutely. Very bluntly, a lot of British people live in total ignorance. They don't realise how far behind Britain has fallen. They don't realise, like, for the kind of country we are, that life should be better. And you can see this when you go to comparable economies. I actually had this conversation with a surgeon in Berlin a couple of weeks ago, and he said that you just go around Germany or the Netherlands and you can see that they are like 10 years ahead now in terms of like the cleanliness, the development, the feel of things. London isn't too far behind, but that's the point. It's like, look at London compared to the rest of the UK. And then that aside, in terms of like development, but also just going to other places and experiencing different lifestyles. We spoke about before this podcast in Southeast Asia that actually they are poorer countries quite significantly, but the culture and the vibe and the lifestyle that you have in those places is far more livable. There's far more community. People are happier. They enjoy the little things like working a few hours a day, then having nice food with family and friends and chilling on the beach in the evening or whatever it may be. And I think when Brits go abroad and they do actually work somewhere else and they see this isn't the only way, then yeah, they can live a much better life. And I also think another part of it is I think some Brits yeah, I think some Brits, both left and right, actually have a bit of a Little Englander complex that is a hangover from Britain's past of being the one of the most, well, probably the most powerful nation in the world. Actually, it was like, and there is this simultaneous superiority complex that British people have too, where they think that Britain is better than it is, and they don't realise that actually a lot of other countries are equally as developed, if not more, or countries that they perceive as being poorer and backwaters really aren't. And Southeast Asia is a prime example of this. To give you an example of this, I did a video on my YouTube recently talking about why life in Southeast Asia is better. And one of the top comments was someone being like, "Oh, no, those people there, they would love to be living in Britain. They all want to move here." No, they fucking don't. They really don't. If you go and speak to them about it, they don't want to move to Britain. Yeah, sure, some people do. There are lots of people who come from developing nations who have this idea of Britain being a lovely, rich, powerful nation, which again is a hangover of the history of
they
Britain.
get a
But
bit of a
really, a lot of
shock when
people,
they get here.
yeah, all that they have that. Again, I can give you another example. About 2 years ago, I was having a chat with an Iranian taxi driver in Leeds, and he said that he's like, yeah, I came here because I heard that Britain was a rich nation. I've come here, it's miserable. The food sucks. Nobody's out in the evenings drinking coffee or eating food with friends. There's no community here. Everybody goes to their job and then goes home. Like, these sorts of things, I really do think that a lot of Brits are blinded by a hangover of our past. Some of them are really clinging on to it as well, because they have this superiority complex, and then others, they're just ignorant, but not in a kind of like blind patriotic sense. And when they go abroad and they see elsewhere, they're like, oh yeah, actually, there is a better life to be had here.
Yeah, it's so true. I agree with everything you just said there. Especially that there is a problem that when immigrant workers do come over here, they do get a bit of a shock. I mean, my wife is a nurse at the hospital. We have a lot of Filipinos coming in, and they're kind of promised the world, and they do get a bit of a shock when they come over here. the culture, but also the pay as well. I mean, by the time they paid their rent, they paid their food, they're not really getting that much out of it. But culturally, I've heard so many times, I've heard from people from Pakistan, from India, from the Philippines as well, that have a real shock and have a real shock adjusting over here because the culture is not there. We don't, like you just said, we're not out in the evenings mixing, socializing, and they miss that, and they want to go back to that. And you know, there's no wonder why we have so many problems with mental illness in this country, where it appears the majority of people's social lives now is going to work, going back home in their comfort, watching Netflix in their bubble, and it's sad. It really is sad.
Yeah,
But
it is. It is, but another thing to contrast with this is that's interesting is if you look at some of the Scandinavian countries, like they generally rank a lot higher for happiness. You know, like Finland is, I think, the happiest in the world. Denmark is one of, but a lot of those countries as well are very much like work and then go home and they stay inside, and the weather is obviously like a lot rougher and
yeah,
darker there at times, but they don't seem to be so miserable. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty that would say that they are, and I have met plenty of Scandinavians who are like, yeah, it sucks there in the winter. That's why we go to Asia too. But like, I don't know. Even with them, they seem to be more more content with their lifestyle. I don't know if it's a money thing or what, because they're a lot richer. But
well,
yeah,
yeah, the big argument with the Scandinavian countries is that they're all rich countries and very socialist countries, and you know, you get a lot of benefits as a citizen. You know, that's always the big argument for why they're so happy
but
there.
they're not even socialist though. They're
Mm,
mixed economies. They're all
mm,
neoliberal. Like Denmark literally said to Bernie Sanders, "Stop calling us socialist. We're not socialist." They've all built their wealth off the free market and capitalism, but they have more. Well, if you want to call it socialist policies in terms of the higher taxation and their investment in public infrastructure and provision of healthcare. But you know, they're still very much capitalist mixed economies, but they seem to be happier,
yeah.
and I'm not entirely sure why. I think that the book, the Almost Nearly Perfect People, digs into it a little bit, and I think maybe it could be because they're slightly more homogenous. They do have some degree of community within their own people, but yeah, I don't know. I find it an interesting contrast either way, considering geographically we're not that far away from them.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting, but I think I'm going to wrap this one up with one last point. I really want to be hopeful for the future of this country. I really, really do. And I think one of the points we egged on earlier about the work-life balance. I think this is one way that I can maybe see a future for this country if we're forced into a much better work-life balance for our citizens, where we do, like we've discussed, I think we need to get back to more basics. I know that's what you enjoy in Southeast Asia, the more basic living of, you know, this is how we've evolved as human beings. This is what we need to go back to. So I'm hopeful that with the forced AI in the workplace, where hopefully if we get a government that does it right, will give us more free time to be able to do things and work as well. The way that work is going, you know, I like the idea, and I know you do, of having, you know, many different avenues for revenue and not just being focused on the standard 9 to 5 job. And you know, we can do things that we enjoy more. It's what I do. I enjoy doing this channel, but my small furniture business where I renovate furniture and things like that, you know,
Yeah,
I have a vision of the future of Britain being something like that. Whether it comes to fruition, I don't know. But for now, I'm interested in quick before we finish up this podcast. Is so you're living in Thailand now. I'm very interested in this part of the world. My wife's from the Philippines. We visit quite often. It's tricky for us to move over there. We've got a son. The one of the main reasons is my wife is type 1 diabetic, so she relies on insulin, so it's incredibly expensive in the Philippines. I think everyone has a few obstacles in their way if they're looking to move to this part of the world, but it seems to be a big draw for people in Europe, Southeast Asia seems to be a massive draw for all the reasons that we just said. You know, people are friendlier no matter what's going on. Just the culture seems so great. So just to wrap this up, what would be your advice to anyone that's looking to try and move, who's not from maybe a wealthy background, or you know, just wants to try and experience maybe just living over in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, so it it really depends on your age and what you've got going on in your life. So to be clear, like what I do in my business, where I coach young men to set up their own online business, right? That's obviously me speaking to young guys that don't really have any responsibilities. They're single and so on. But the core crux of it that can actually be passed on to people of multiple different ages is you want to develop some kind of remote income stream that allows you to then live out there and hop around, because finding work in those countries is very difficult. They put their own citizens first. Like in most of those countries, you can't
Yeah,
actually get a job there unless you're ethnically from that country. So with older Europeans, a lot of the time out there, you'll see they've retired there or they've married a local, and then they co-own a business at 49% because it's got to be majority owned, depending on what country you're in Southeast Asia. But yeah, fundamentally, what I would advise is to get yourself in a position where you have the finances to be able to live out there, and whether that's you know you do 6 months here in the UK and then 6 months out there, or you stay out there. Having remote income is the key to freedom with what you're doing. Like once you're earning online, you have a bit more span with where you can move around, and the bar to entry is pretty low in Southeast Asia. I'm saying it as a generalized term with the exception of Singapore, but let's talk about Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia. You know, you at the very beginning, depending on where you are, you can be getting by on £1,000 a month there as a single person. If you're with somebody else, you can split your rent and you could be living in a very nice lifestyle for very affordable. Once you start earning 1,500, 2K up, you can live very comfortably there. And the way that you're going to do that is by tapping into the digital economy, the space online. And yeah, there's lots of different avenues that you can pursue with that. But this is exactly what I help people with in my business to find which avenue is the best for them.
which I think is great. I mean, we talked about how more Brits should experience working and living abroad. I think travel always broadens the horizon. I know it's a common thing to say, but it just does. And if there is, you know, if there's some encouragement out there for young Brits to just go and experience that, and you know, experience working abroad, experience what it's like to live and work in another country. I think that's great. And I think it is becoming easier now to work remotely, isn't it? And we just discussed having several different revenue streams and things like that. I think it's
Yeah, it depends. The problem with remote work being employed is that a lot of remote jobs, you're still bound to the country that you get the job in. And unfortunately, we have seen a massive drop in remote jobs outside of certain industries. Like the only industries that seem to be consistently hiring remote only are software engineers, the back end, some marketing positions. But there's been a shift post COVID now where people are being expected to go into the office more. Roles are hybrid, or if they are remote, you can't do it from anywhere. So fundamentally, the key to freedom and ownership and living where you want and moving around Southeast Asia is going to come from you owning your own means of income, owning your own business, having multiple different streams that you are in
yeah.
control of. If you're lucky enough to find a job that allows you to work from anywhere, absolutely go for it. But for most people, the best way that you can do it is by setting up your own business instead.
Awesome. Excellent. So, guys, if you want to know and learn more about everything that Ollie's saying there, I'm going to put all his links down below to your TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. You can find out a lot more about getting away from Britain, but also, I think we'll wrap this up by just saying, Brits, just stop moaning all the time. It's just, come on, it's not helping, and that'll be the fundamental message. Ollie, thank you so much for coming on, mate. I really appreciate the chat. It was really great, and I think the viewers have learnt a lot. But yeah, go check out Ollie's social. I'll put them all down below, and yeah, maybe have you on another time, Ollie. It was a really good chat.
Nice one, mate. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Right, take care, guys. And if you can like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're listening on Spotify and Apple Podcast, I really appreciate a follow and a review as well. We're really growing on Spotify and Apple now, so that really helps out the channel. And until next time, take care.